Throughout the centuries, there were many execution methods used by different countries to take the lives of criminals and those who were condemned to death. Many of the worst methods include public humiliation, and some of the most savage include being hanged, drawn and quartered, or being beheaded. Some kings and queens such as Henry VIII and Bloody Mary would get a terrible reputation for being disturbing with their bloodthirst. Bloody Mary would burn Protestants at the stake in huge public scenes, and also Henry VIII would even order the beheading of two of his own wives, and would even boil alive a cook suspected of poisoning. But even since the dawn of time, people were being put to death. One of the most shocking forms of execution was Damnatio ad Bestias, which translates from Latin as condemnation to beasts, and this was used by the Romans. Join us today as we look at this, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Damnatio ad Bestias appeared during the Roman Republic around the 2nd century BC, and was part of other blood sports where people would take on creatures such as lions. But it was basically used as a method of execution where a person would be killed by different wild animals who were encouraged to savagely maul and attack a condemned criminal or victim. It was even used at the first games of the Flavian Amphitheatre in the year 80, and the actual purpose of condemnation by beasts is disputed. It could have been linked to religious sacrifice to the gods, as well as being a method of legal punishment. In places where lions were native, this was often the case in Africa and India, and there were accounts of humans being fed to lions and crocodiles in Egypt and Libya. During Alexander the Great's campaign in Asia, there were accounts of condemnation by beast, and it was said that a man who spoke before Alexander for someone who had been sentenced to death was themselves also thrown into a pit with a lion. But this Macedonian man managed to actually defeat the lion, and because of this he became a favourite of Alexander, and this won the emperor over. In Africa, a Carthaginian general named Hamilcar Barca threw many of his prisoners to beasts, and Hannibal ordered Romans who were captured to fight each other, with the winner then being forced to fight an elephant. Regarding the use of lions in Rome, they were actually rather rare, but other animals were used to kill prisoners and criminals, such as bears, leopards and tigers. It was used alongside gladiatorial combat, and there were two different variations. The first was to be thrown to the beast, where humans would be defenceless and would have no weapons, but the other type was where they were thrown to the animals and would be expected and prepared to fight, being given training, weapons, shields and even possibly armour. Some of the best beast fighters were trained specifically, but often condemned criminals would be thrown to the beasts to be just killed. Lions were used by two commanders in Rome who brought them to the city, and the execution of criminals using animals and beasts were initially used as a method of military punishment for crimes such as defection or desertion. Often those who were condemned would be tied to columns and would be bound, which left them defenceless, and they would be eaten rather quickly. There are some recorded accounts of Damnatio ad Bestias. For example, in Rome, Strato, a Greek geographer, wrote how he saw a rebel slave leader, Celerus, being executed in this way. Also, it was recorded how a thief and bandit, Laureolus, was crucified, but then he was eaten by eagles and a bear, whilst he was still alive. Other executions took place over the years, and it was said that one man was thrown to the beasts, purely for entertainment and humour, as a crowd deemed him so ugly that he should be thrown to the animals. So this man was killed purely as he was deemed to be too ugly. Caligula would force prisoners and condemned individuals to be fed to circus animals, as during his reign the price of meat went too high. Another Roman general, Pompey, would also put on huge spectacles using animals, in which he would stage a fight between armed gladiators and 18 elephants. But inside of Rome, the most common animal used for executions were tigers, which were used specifically to kill, and then brown bears were used, but these were less popular. Damnatio ad Bestias was used heavily against Christians, and this began in the 1st century. Under the reign of Nero, Christians were persecuted, and it was said that these men and women were wrapped in animal skins, and then were thrown to dogs, who mauled them to death. This was also used by other emperors, who performed this sort of execution in the arenas and amphitheatres, and they even used larger animals. This persecution of Christians was meant to signal them as the worst criminals of the Roman society, and was meant to show the population that they were not to become Christian. There has been no evidence found that suggests that Christians were executed on the grandest stage of them all in the Colosseum in Rome, but Christians were technically guilty of treason, were considered to have dissented against the gods worshipped by the Romans, were classed as witches and followers of magic, and were even deemed confessors of a banned religion. Because of these crimes, they were considered the worst criminals in society. The Roman public would cry, "Away with them to the lions," referencing how they wanted to shame the Christians inside of the theatres. There were many other crimes in which people could be thrown to the lions for that haven't been mentioned. One could have been for being a sorcerer to harm others. Those who were guilty of poisoning were also thrown to lions. Also, counterfeiters would be thrown to animals, but often were also burned alive. Being a political criminal meant you could also be killed by animals. One of the most shocking crimes of killing your father would result in someone being placed in a leather bag and drowned, but then the bag was filled with snakes to attack the condemned person. Rebels and also those who kidnapped children could be thrown to the beasts and executed in other ways. Following the death sentence, often the condemned would have no rights, and their property and wealth was confiscated. But Damnatio ad Bestias was abolished in Rome in the year 681, but it was used 400 years later in the Byzantine Empire, when a number of disgraced generals were thrown to lions. There were many accounts of people who managed to survive the sentence of being thrown to the beasts. There was the account of Androcles, a slave during Caligula's rule, who was thrown to a lion after he fled from his master. But the lion spared him, allegedly when he pulled a thorn from the lion's paw when he was in Africa, and the lion remembered him for this and then subsequently left him alone. Being executed by animals was not just exclusive to Rome, as in India they also used elephants to execute condemned people. Being slaughtered by animals would have been very brutal and barbaric, but to many people it was a form of public entertainment and a spectacle. This form of public entertainment would last for centuries, as people would flock to witness executions. But by watching lions and bears ripping a condemned person to bits, it must have been bloody, savage and awful to have witnessed. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.